My own parents chose my spoiled brother over me and threw me out at 18. 10 years later, I came back driving a Tesla, wearing designer clothes, and carrying the deed to half their precious neighborhood. They thought I'd crawl back begging. Instead, I became their worst nightmare. If you've ever been the forgotten child or felt like you weren't good enough for your own family, this story will hit different. Make sure you're subscribed because stories like these remind us that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Now let me tell you how I went from the family disappointment to the woman who made them all regret everything. You know that moment when you realize your own parents have a favorite child, and it's definitely not you? I lived that reality for 18 years. My name is Grace, and this is the story of how being kicked out of my family became the best thing that ever happened to me. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, everything revolved around my brother Tyler, and I mean everything. He was 2 years younger than me, but you'd never know it from the way my parents treated him like he was the sun, and I was just some random planet floating around in space. Tyler was the star quarterback, honor roll student, and basically walked on water according to my mother Linda and father Robert. Me? I was the artsy one, the dreamer, the one who spent hours painting in the garage instead of studying calculus. While Tyler got standing ovations at football games, I got lectures about being more practical. When Tyler brought home another trophy, I brought home another painting that my parents would glance at and say, "That's nice, honey," before turning their attention back to their golden boy. The favoritism wasn't even subtle. When Tyler turned 16, they bought him a brand new Jeep Wrangler. When I turned 16, they handed me the keys to my mom's 10-year-old Honda Civic and told me I should be grateful. When Tyler wanted to join expensive summer camps for football, money was never an issue. When I asked if I could take art classes at the community college, suddenly we needed to watch our spending. But the real kicker was college planning. Tyler got into Penn State on a partial football scholarship, and my parents were over the moon. They threw him a party, bought him everything he needed, and my dad literally cried tears of joy. Meanwhile, I had been accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the most prestigious art schools in the country. My portfolio was strong enough that I'd even gotten some scholarship money, but I still needed help with the remaining tuition. I'll never forget sitting at our kitchen table, acceptance letter in hand, trying to explain to my parents why this was my dream. My mom just shook her head and said, "Grace, art isn't a real career. You need something stable, something practical." My dad chimed in with his favorite line, "You can't eat creativity." They refused to help pay for art school, not a single dollar. But that same week, they handed Tyler a credit card for college expenses and told him not to worry about money. The message was crystal clear. His dreams mattered, mine didn't. I spent that summer working 3 jobs trying to save money for school. I was a waitress at a diner, cleaned houses on weekends, and babysat whenever I could. I was exhausted but determined. I thought maybe if I showed them how serious I was, how hard I was willing to work, they'd change their minds and support me. But when August came around and I told them I was still planning to go to art school, everything exploded. My dad's face turned red, and he started yelling about how I was being selfish and unrealistic. My mom stood there with her arms crossed, nodding along like I was the most ungrateful daughter in the world. And Tyler? Tyler just sat there playing on his phone, not saying a word to defend me. "If you're so determined to throw your life away on this art nonsense," my dad said, his voice shaking with anger, "then you can figure it out on your own. We're not supporting this fantasy anymore." That's when my mom delivered the final blow. "Maybe it's time you learned what the real world is like. If you're not going to be practical, then you're not staying under our roof." I couldn't believe it. They were actually kicking me out because I wanted to pursue my passion instead of their idea of success. I looked at Tyler, hoping he'd say something, anything, to stand up for his sister. But he just shrugged and said, "Maybe they have a point, Grace. Art school is kind of risky." The next few years were brutal, I'm not going to lie. I bounced between friends' couches, worked every job you can imagine, and ate more ramen noodles than any human should. I enrolled in community college and took art classes whenever I could afford them. Some nights I slept in my car because I had nowhere else to go. But you know what I did during those dark times? I painted. I painted my frustration, my loneliness, my dreams, my anger. I poured everything into my art. And slowly, something beautiful started emerging from all that pain. When I turned 21, I started sharing my artwork online. Nothing fancy, just pictures of my paintings on social media with captions about my journey. I talked about being kicked out, about following your dreams even when no one believes in you, about turning pain into power. And people started responding. It started small. Someone would message me asking to buy a painting, or commission me to create something custom. I reinvested every penny back into supplies and better equipment. I rented a tiny studio apartment that was basically just 4 walls and a bathroom, but it was mine. That's when I met Diana, a gallery owner in New York City who saw my work online. She was this incredible woman in her 50s who had built an empire in the art world. Diana didn't just buy my paintings, she became my mentor, teaching me about the business side of art, about marketing myself, about thinking bigger than just selling individual pieces. "Honey," she told me over coffee one day, "your story is as powerful as your art. People don't just want to buy paintings, they want to buy hope. You're selling dreams to people who feel stuck, and that's worth more than you know." She was right. I started teaching online art classes, sharing my techniques but also my story of resilience. I created courses about finding your voice as an artist, about building confidence, about turning rejection into fuel for success. My social media following grew from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands, but I didn't stop there. Diana taught me about investing, about building multiple income streams, about thinking like an entrepreneur instead of just an artist. I took every penny I earned and invested it wisely, some in stocks, some in real estate, some back into my growing business. By the time I was 25, I was running a 6-figure art business. I had an online course that taught thousands of students, a line of art supplies, and galleries across the country featuring my work. I was traveling, speaking at conferences, and living a life I had only dreamed about when I was sleeping in my car. The crazy part? I hadn't spoken to my family in 7 years. Not a single phone call, text message, or email. I had no idea what was happening in their lives, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. I had built my own family with Diana, Katie, and all the amazing people I'd met along the way. But last year, when I turned 28, something inside me shifted. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just curious. I wondered if they ever thought about me, if they ever regretted how things ended, and then I had this wild idea that I couldn't shake. I decided to buy a house in my old neighborhood. Not just any house, the biggest, most beautiful house on Maple Street, the one that had been for sale for months because it was so expensive, the one that all the neighbors whispered about, wondering who could possibly afford it. When I drove up to that house in my white Tesla Model S, wearing a Valentino dress and carrying Louis Vuitton bags, I saw Mrs. Henderson from across the street nearly drop her watering can. She recognized me immediately, even though I looked completely different from the broken 18-year-old who had left town a decade earlier. Word traveled fast in small neighborhoods. Within an hour of me pulling into that driveway, I knew my parents would hear that Grace was back, and she definitely wasn't the same girl they'd kicked out. I was unpacking boxes when I saw my dad's old pickup truck slow down in front of my house. He stopped completely, staring at my Tesla in the driveway, probably trying to process what he was seeing. I waved from my front porch like nothing had ever happened between us. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door with a casserole and a nervous smile. She looked older, more worn down than I remembered. Her hair had gone completely gray, and she seemed smaller somehow. "Grace," she said, her voice shaky, We heard you were back in town. You look amazing." I invited her in, and I could see her eyes taking in everything: the marble countertops, the original artwork on the walls, the designer furniture. This wasn't the home of someone who had thrown their life away on art. "How are Dad and Tyler?" I asked, serving her coffee in cups that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Her face fell a little. "Your father's been struggling since he lost his job 2 years ago, And Tyler, well, things haven't worked out quite like we expected. Apparently, Tyler's football career ended with a knee injury his sophomore year of college. He switched majors 3 times, barely graduated, and had been jumping from job to job ever since. His marriage fell apart, and now he was back living at home with a mountain of debt and a drinking problem. "We've been thinking about you a lot," my mom continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Wondering how you were doing, if you were okay." We made mistakes, Grace. Big mistakes." I sat there listening, feeling strangely calm. This was the moment I had imagined for years, my parents finally admitting they were wrong, finally seeing that I had made it despite their lack of faith. But instead of feeling victorious, I just felt sad for all the time we had lost. That evening, Tyler showed up at my door. He looked rough, unshaven, tired, defeated. The golden boy shine had definitely worn off. "So, you're the big success story now," he said, not even bothering with hello. "Must be nice, rubbing it in everyone's faces." I looked at my little brother, this man who had once been the center of our family's universe, and I realized he was still waiting for the world to hand him things instead of working for them. "I'm not rubbing anything in anyone's face, Tyler," I said calmly. "I'm just living my life." "Come on, Grace. Moving back here in your fancy car, buying the biggest house on the street, that's not about living your life, that's about proving a point." Maybe he was partially right. Maybe part of me did want to show them what they had lost when they chose him over me. But as I stood there looking at my brother, I realized something important. Their approval didn't matter anymore. I had already proven everything I needed to prove, and I had proven it to myself. Over the next few weeks, my parents kept trying to reconnect. They'd show up with invitations to dinner, old photo albums, stories about how they always knew I was talented. It was like they were trying to rewrite history, pretending they had always been supportive. But I wasn't interested in pretending. I was polite, I was kind, but I wasn't going to act like the past decade hadn't happened. They had made their choice when it mattered most, and now I was making mine. The beautiful thing was, I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. I had built something incredible out of their rejection. I had turned their no into fuel for my biggest yes to myself. I decided to use my success for something meaningful. I opened a community art center in downtown Hartford, specifically for kids who felt different, kids who were dreamers, kids whose families didn't understand their creative spirits. I called it the Phoenix Studio because sometimes you have to burn down who you were to become who you're meant to be. The center offers free art classes, mentorship programs, and scholarships for art school. Every kid who walks through those doors gets to hear the same message I wish someone had given me at 18. Your dreams are valid, your creativity matters, and sometimes the people who are supposed to believe in you the most are the ones who will try to clip your wings. My parents came to the grand opening. They stood in the back, watching me give a speech to a room full of young artists and their families. After the event, my dad approached me with tears in his eyes. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "I should have said that 10 years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become." I thanked him for saying that, but I realized something profound in that moment. I didn't need his pride anymore. I had spent years building my own sense of worth, and it wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. Tyler eventually got himself together, went to rehab, and started working at the art center as a volunteer. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship, but it's different now. I'm not the little sister looking up to the golden child anymore. We're just 2 adults trying to figure out how to be family again. As for my parents, we have a cordial relationship now. We see each other occasionally, exchange pleasantries, and they love showing off their successful daughter to their friends. But we'll never be close the way we might have been if they had chosen to support me when I needed them most. The truth is, their rejection was a gift, even though it didn't feel like it at the time. It forced me to develop a strength I never would have discovered otherwise. It taught me that the only approval I really needed was my own. It showed me that sometimes the people who believe in you the least do you the biggest favor by getting out of your way. Now, when young artists come to me feeling discouraged because their families don't support their dreams, I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Other people's limited vision of your potential has nothing to do with what you're actually capable of achieving. If this story resonated with you, I want you to know that your family's opinion doesn't define your worth. Sometimes being the black sheep is actually your superpower. Hit that like button if you believe that rejection can be redirection, and subscribe for more stories about people who turned their pain into power. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by people who should have believed in you most? I read every single comment, and your story matters too.